In Part 1, we witness the 100-year struggle of the African American civil rights movement, culminating in the landmark legislative victories of 1964 and 1965. But that victory was not an end. It was a beginning. The success of the movement, its tactics, its legal strategies, and its moral power created a massive ripple effect across America. It provided the blueprint and the inspiration for every other marginalized group to stand up and demand their rights. In this video, we'll explore that expanding movement. We'll see how Betty Friedan gave voice to the problem that has no name and launched the second wave of feminism. We'll march with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta in their nonviolent fight for the dignity of farm workers. And we'll explore the Brown Power movement that rose alongside them. We'll witness the Red Power movement's symbolic and defiant occupations, from Alcatraz to Wounded Knee. And finally, we'll shine a light on the unsung heroes of the movement, the organizers, speakers, and legal geniuses who made it all possible. This is part 2 of A Nation Remade, the expanding movement. If you believe this history is essential, help us spread it by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. As the civil rights movement remade America's racial landscape, a second wave of feminism was born. While the first wave had fought for suffrage, this new movement sought social, economic, and political equality. The spark was the 1963 publication of The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. Friedan, a writer and suburban housewife, had surveyed her college classmates. She found that despite having the American dream, a house, a loving husband, healthy children, these women were afflicted with a malaise of utter boredom and lack of fulfillment. She called this the problem that has no name. She argued that society had trapped women in a feminine mystique, the assumption that women could only find fulfillment through housework and child rearing. Her book told millions of women they were not alone. In 1966, Friedan co-founded the National Organization for Women, NOW. Their mission was to bring women into full participation in the mainstream of American society now, in truly equal partnership with men. Their first action shows the direct link to the civil rights movement. They sued the EEC, the commission created by the 1964 Civil Rights Act, to force it to enforce Title VII's ban on sex-segregated help wanted ads. They won. The movement's greatest legislative achievement was Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. The law, modeled on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, is simple. No person shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Title IX is often misunderstood as just a sports law, but its impact was total. In academics, it forced professional schools, law, medicine, engineering, to end quotas and discriminatory policies that had kept women out. But its most visible impact was in athletics. Before Title IX, girls' sports were an afterthought. The numbers show the revolution. In 1971, fewer than 295,000 girls played high school varsity sports. By 2001, that number had leaped to 2.8 million. The 1960s also saw the rise of the Chicano Movement, a fight for racial, economic, and political justice for Mexican Americans. The most famous branch of this movement was the nonviolent labor struggle led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Together, they co-founded the United Farm Workers, UFW, to fight for farm workers, who were among the most exploited laborers in America and were excluded from federal labor laws. Their defining moment was the Delano grape strike, from 1965 to 1970. But this is a crucial, often overlooked story. The strike, huelga, was not started by Chavez. It was begun by Filipino-American farm workers led by Larry Itliong. The growers tried to break the Filipino strike by bringing in Mexican-American workers. Chavez and Huerta faced a choice: break the strike or join it. Despite reservations, the UFW membership voted to join the Filipino strike. This multiracial solidarity was the key to their eventual victory. Chavez was deeply influenced by MLK and Gandhi and was committed to strict nonviolence. They used three main tactics. First, the strike, huelga, where workers walked off the fields for 5 years. Second, the march, la peregrinación. In 1966, Chavez led a 300-mile march from Delano to Sacramento to draw national attention. Third, and most powerful, the boycott. The UFW organized a national and international consumer boycott of grapes. Millions of Americans, from suburban moms to political leaders, stopped eating grapes in solidarity. After 5 years of immense economic pressure, the growers were finally forced to the table in 1970, signing contracts that recognized the UFW. Like the Black Power movement, a more militant Brown Power movement also emerged. The Brown Berets, founded in Los Angeles, were explicitly modeled after the Black Panther Party. They fought police brutality and demanded better education. In Texas, the La Raza Unida Party took a different approach, forming a third political party. They achieved stunning success in towns like Crystal City, where they won control of the school board and city council. For the first Americans, the 1960s and 70s was a period of intense activism known as the Red Power movement. Their fight was not necessarily for inclusion into a society they saw as colonial, but for the reclamation of land, sovereignty, and dignity promised in hundreds of broken treaties. The leading organization was the American Indian Movement, AIM, founded in 1968. Their protests were masterworks of political theater, designed to be highly visible, symbolic, and impossible for the media to ignore. The symbolic beginning was the 19-month occupation of Alcatraz, from 1969 to 1971. A group calling themselves Indians of All Tribes seized the abandoned federal prison. Their claim was based on a treaty they argued allowed Native Americans to reclaim any abandoned federal land. They issued a proclamation offering to buy Alcatraz for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, the price settlers allegedly paid for Manhattan. They justified the price with biting satire, writing that the island was perfectly suited for an Indian reservation. It was isolated, lacks adequate water, has no sanitation, and has been declared unfit for civilized people. In short, it was just like the reservations the government had given them. The occupation was a stunning media success. It is credited with forcing a massive shift in federal policy, ending the termination policy of assimilation, and beginning the modern era of Indian self-determination. The climax of the Red Power movement was the Wounded Knee incident in 1973. AIM members and Oglala Lakota activists seized the tiny hamlet of Wounded Knee, South Dakota. The choice of location was profound and tragic. Wounded Knee was the exact site of the 1890 massacre, where the U.S. 7th Cavalry had slaughtered hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children. By occupying this sacred ground, AIM was forcing America to confront its entire history of violence. The protest became a 71-day armed standoff between AIM and federal forces. It was the longest civil disorder in the history of the U.S. Marshal Service, and it brought global media attention to the demands of Native Americans. A movement is not just its most famous leaders. The civil rights movement was a tapestry woven by thousands of unsung heroes, whose names are often left out, but without whom the movement would have failed. Before he was the first African-American Supreme Court justice, he was Mr. Civil Rights. As chief counsel for the NAACP, he was the brilliant lawyer who argued and won both Sweatt v. Painter and Brown v. Board of Education. He personally dismantled the legal architecture of Jim Crow, brick by brick. Rustin was the logistical genius who organized the entire 1963 March on Washington. He was also a pacifist who had studied in India and was a key advisor who taught Dr. King the principles of Gandhian nonviolence. Why is he unsung? Rustin was openly gay, which was seen as a major liability. He was often marginalized and forced to work in the background, his contributions deliberately obscured for decades. Hamer was not a lawyer. She was a sharecropper in Mississippi. She was fired from her job and later brutally beaten in a jail cell, suffering permanent injuries simply for attempting to register to vote. She co-founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, MFDP, to challenge the all-white delegation at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. She gave riveting, televised testimony about her beating. President Lyndon B. Johnson, terrified that her story would alienate Southern white voters, called a fake press conference to cut off her speech. The tactic failed. The networks aired her testimony in full later, shocking the nation. When offered a compromise of 2 non-voting seats, Hamer refused, famously stating, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." Before he was a congressman, John Lewis was the young, fiery leader of SNCC. He was a freedom rider and one of the leaders of the Bloody Sunday March in Selma, where his skull was fractured by a state trooper. At the 1963 March on Washington, 23-year-old Lewis's prepared speech was so radical and angry, calling the Kennedy Civil Rights Bill too little and too late, that other leaders, including Dr. King, had to corner him backstage and plead with him to tone it down to save the event. Gregory was the first black comedian to successfully cross over and perform uncensored for white audiences. He used his fame and his humor as a weapon for the movement, marching with SNCC and joining sit-ins. He disarmed hostile audiences with cutting wit. This humor made white audiences listen to a message they would have otherwise rejected. The period from the 1950s to the 1970s was nothing less than a second Reconstruction of the United States. It was a mass movement of ordinary citizens who, through extraordinary courage, forced the nation to confront the 100-year-old betrayal of its founding principles. The legal strategy of Thurgood Marshall, the nonviolent action of Dr. King, the defiant self-reliance of the Black Panthers, and the unshakable voice of Fannie Lou Hamer all combined to destroy the legal and social framework of Jim Crow. This struggle, in turn, provided the blueprint. The Chicano Movement, led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, secured dignity for farm workers. The American Indian Movement used symbolic protest to reclaim sovereignty. And the women's movement, sparked by Betty Friedan and codified by Title IX, fundamentally remade the role of women in American society. The era did not end racism, sexism, or inequality, but it destroyed the legal framework that supported them, creating the more inclusive, complex, and more perfect union that we inhabit today. Thank you for watching A Nation Remade. If you learned something from this series, please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history. We've covered many movements. Besides the African American Civil Rights Movement, which other movement, women's, Chicano, or American Indian, do you think had the most profound impact on the America you live in today? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious.